In 1978, in a small classroom at Columbia University, a researcher named Carol Dweck handed a 10-year-old boy a puzzle he was not going to be able to solve. She watched him from across the room. He picked it up, he turned it over in his hands, and then he did something she had never seen a child do before. He rubbed his hands together, looked at the puzzle like it was a present someone had just handed him, and said out loud to no one, "I love a challenge." She stared at him, and then she spent the next 30 years of her life trying to understand what was different about that boy. What you're about to hear is what she found. Now I want you to picture that scene with me for a second, because there is something inside it that does not make sense. Dweck wasn't running a study for happy children. She was running a research project on how kids handle failure. The whole point was to give children problems that were too hard for them and watch what happened to their minds when they couldn't solve them. She had been doing this for years. She had a clipboard full of data on what children look like when they hit a wall. What kids look like is they crumble. They blame the puzzle. They say they're stupid. They start trying to cheat. They look around to see who else is failing so they can feel a little better about themselves. Dweck had watched hundreds of children do exactly that. She had a name for it in her notes. She called it the helpless response. And she had assumed, like everyone in psychology assumed in 1978, that this was just what happens to a normal human being when they encounter something they cannot do. And then this boy rubbed his hands together. He didn't crumble. He didn't blame the puzzle. He didn't even seem to notice that he was failing. From inside his head, he wasn't failing at all. He was being given something interesting to think about. The same exact puzzle that made the kid 2 desks over want to die was, to him, a present. So the question Dweck found herself sitting with that afternoon, the question she could not let go of, the question that would eat the next 3 decades of her career, was a very simple one. What is going on inside that child's head? Why is he having a completely different experience of the same situation? And here is the part that mattered. Was he born like that? Or did somebody do that to him? Because if he was born like that, then this is just one more thing in life you either have or you don't. Lucky kid. End of story. But if somebody did that to him, if somewhere along the way somebody said something or did something that installed in this 10-year-old a way of meeting difficulty that the kid 2 desks over had never been given, then this is one of the most important questions a human being could ever ask. Because if you can install it in a child, you might be able to install it in yourself. You might be able to install it in a room full of employees. You might be able to install it in your own kid. You might be able to install it in the exact part of your life you have already given up on. Hold on to him, the boy who rubbed his hands together. We are going to come back to him, and by the end of this you are going to know what was different about him, because the answer is the entire reason any of this matters. But before we get there, I want you to do something for me. I want you to find him in your own life, because you have been on both sides of that puzzle. Everybody has. There are areas of your life where you walk in expecting to fail and laughing about it, and there are areas of your life where one piece of feedback can ruin your week. Same person, same brain, 2 completely different operating systems. Picture this. You sit down at the piano for the first time. You're 42 years old. You've never played anything in your life. You hit the keys and it sounds like a cat falling down a flight of stairs, and you laugh. You think, well, that was bad, try again. You try again, it's still bad. You don't take it personally. You don't conclude anything about your soul. You go to bed thinking, I bet I'll be a little less terrible tomorrow. And now picture a different room, a different day. You give a presentation at work. Somebody you respect listens to it, and at the end they say something kind of vague like, that was good, the slides were a little dense though. And you go home and you cannot eat. You cannot sleep. You replay every word they said and every word you said. You start scrolling through your contacts wondering who else thinks you're a fraud. 3 days later you are still thinking about it. 6 months later, you remember it during a job interview and you flinch. What is the difference between those two people? It's the same brain, the same nervous system, the same human being walking through the world. But one of them met failure with curiosity, and the other one met it like a verdict handed down from God. Dweck would tell you this is not a personality difference. This is not who you are. This is a mindset, a particular way of understanding what your abilities actually mean, and it can be different in different parts of your life. You can have it about the piano and not have it about your career. You can have it about cooking and not have it about your relationships. You can be the boy who rubs his hands together in one room of your life and the kid who falls apart in the room next door. And what you're about to learn is that the difference, the entire difference, comes down to one belief, one sentence in your head about what your abilities actually are. Picture this. It is the late 1990s. Dweck is no longer the young researcher in the small Columbia classroom. She is a tenured professor with a lab and a team of graduate students, and she has spent 20 years stalking the question that boy planted in her head. By now she has a theory. She thinks she knows what makes a kid rub his hands together at a hard puzzle, and she thinks she knows what makes the other kid crumble. But a theory isn't worth anything until you can prove it. So she designs an experiment that is going to become one of the most quoted studies in modern psychology. She and her team walk into a New York City public school. They pull 400 fifth graders out of class, one at a time, and they give each kid a set of puzzles. The puzzles are easy. Almost every child does well. The kid finishes, the researcher takes the test, looks at the score, and says one of two things. To half the children, she says, "Wow, you got most of those right. You must be really smart at this." To the other half, she says, "Wow, you got most of those right. You must have worked really hard at this." That is the entire intervention. One sentence, 12 words versus 14, said one time, to children who had never met the researcher before and would probably never meet her again. The kids leave the room thinking nothing of it. They go back to class. They don't tell anybody anything. The whole exchange took less than a minute, and then the next part of the study begins. The kids come back, and the researchers say to each child, "You can pick from 2 more tests. The first one is about as hard as the last one. You'll probably do well. The second one is harder, and you might not get all of them right, but you'll learn a lot from trying it. Which one do you want?" The kids who had been told they were smart, most of them picked the easy test. They didn't even hesitate. They said no thanks to the harder one. Some of them said it nervously. Some of them said it like it was obvious. They had just been told they were smart, and now somebody was offering them a test where smart kids might not look smart anymore. So they declined. The kids who had been told they worked hard, 90% of them picked the harder test. Same school, same classroom, same age. The only difference between those two groups was a single sentence said one time about a single test. Now this is the part of the experiment a lot of people have heard about. Smart praise versus effort praise. Pick effort, got it. But Dweck wasn't done. She wanted to know what happens after that choice. So she gives all the kids a third test. And this one is genuinely hard. It is actually a test designed for older students. None of the fifth graders are supposed to do well on it. Every single child is going to struggle. And Dweck is sitting there watching what happens when these two groups, who started the day in the exact same place, hit a wall. The kids who had been called smart fall apart. They start saying it's boring. They start saying they don't like puzzles. Their scores drop. Their confidence drops. Some of them give up before they're done. And here is the part that I find genuinely chilling. When the experiment is over, the researchers tell each child, "We're going to ask you about your scores so we can share them with another school. How did you do?" The kids who had been told they were smart lied. 40% of them lied. They inflated their scores to make themselves sound better. Children who had walked into that room as ordinary fifth graders, no different from any other kid in the city, were now lying to a stranger about their math performance because 20 minutes earlier somebody had told them they were smart, and now they could not afford to look like they weren't. The kids who had been told they worked hard didn't lie. They reported their scores honestly, and on a final easy test at the end of the study, they actually scored higher than they had at the very beginning. They had improved inside the same hour, just from being in the room with the harder one. Read those results back to yourself for a second, because this is not an experiment about children. This is an experiment about what one sentence does to a human being. One sentence about who they are, said by somebody whose opinion carries weight, can change which test they pick, how they handle failure, and whether they will tell the truth about themselves to a stranger in 20 minutes, to an 11-year-old who didn't even know it was happening. And now I want you to ask yourself a question I am going to be honest with you about. I'm not sure I want to know my own answer to this one. What sentences have been said to you? Which brings us back to the boy in the puzzle room. We are not at his story yet, but we are closer than we were a minute ago. Because if a single sentence said one time to a stranger's child can do that, can change which test they pick, can change whether they lie about themselves, can do all of it inside 20 minutes, then somebody said something to that boy somewhere along the way. Maybe his mother, maybe a teacher, maybe just one offhand line from a grandfather at a kitchen table when he was 4. Some sentence got installed in his head before he ever walked into Dweck's classroom, and the sentence is the reason he could pick up a puzzle that was too hard for him and rub his hands together like it was a present. The question is, what was that sentence? What kind of language do you have to put inside a child to grow that kind of mind? And the harder question, the one a lot of grown adults watching this video do not actually want to answer, is what was the sentence said to you? Because the same way one sentence in a lab made 5th graders lie about their scores, the sentences said to you when you were small are still running. They are running right now, today, in the parts of your life where you don't try things, in the email you don't send, in the relationship you don't fix, in the conversation you keep avoiding because some part of you, somewhere in the back of your head, has already decided what trying would mean about who you are. Dweck has a name for the sentence that creates the boy in the puzzle room. She calls it a growth mindset. The belief that your abilities are not fixed. They're things you grow. The belief that struggle is not a verdict on you. It's just what learning looks like from the inside. And she has a name for the sentence that creates the kid who falls apart at the harder puzzle. She calls it a fixed mindset. The belief that your abilities are a fixed amount you were handed at birth, and every challenge in life is a test that reveals how much of it you got. If you are inside a fixed mindset, every hard moment in your life is a referendum on your worth. Every failure is a verdict. Every struggle is humiliation, because struggling means you must not have had enough of the thing you were supposed to be born with. If you are inside a growth mindset, every hard moment is just information. Information about what to work on next. The struggle isn't a verdict, it's the process. The failure isn't proof of who you are, it's a draft. Now, if I told you those were 2 ways of thinking that exist on a chart in a textbook somewhere, you'd nod and forget about it. But if I told you, and this is what Dweck spent the next part of her career proving, that the difference between those 2 mindsets is the difference between the careers that compound and the careers that crater, between the kids who become champions and the kids who become cautionary tales, between the marriages that grow and the marriages that fossilize, then you'd start paying attention. So let me show you what I mean. Let me take you out of the lab and into a place where the consequences of these 2 mindsets are easy to see. The consequences are written on the careers of the most famous people in the world. Picture this. It is 1984. The most famous tennis player on earth is a 25-year-old American named John McEnroe. If you are under 30, you might not know the name. If you are over 40, you do. McEnroe is the best tennis player alive. He has just had what is statistically one of the greatest seasons in the history of the sport. He wins 82 matches and loses 3. He wins Wimbledon. He wins the US Open. He is, by any objective measurement, an absolute genius at his job. He is also, by every account from everybody who knew him, miserable. McEnroe is famous for a particular kind of behavior on the court. When something goes wrong in a match, when a line judge makes a call he doesn't like, when a fan coughs at the wrong moment, when his racket strings break, he loses his mind, he screams, he throws the racket, he shouts at officials. There is a tape that tens of millions of people saw on television in the 80s of John McEnroe standing on center court at Wimbledon shrieking the words, "You cannot be serious," into the face of a chair umpire. Those 4 words are still quoted 40 years later. They are the 4 words that defined his entire image to the world in his autobiography. And this is the part most people don't know. McEnroe gave reasons for everything. He wrote about a match he lost in 1984 to a player named Ivan Lendl. McEnroe lost because, he said, he was distracted. By what? By a man in the stands wearing a pink shirt. By a cameraman who he didn't like the look of. He wrote about another match he lost because there was sawdust on the court, and the sawdust was a problem because of a particular brand of sneaker he was wearing that day. And the sneaker was a problem because his sponsor had given him a new pair, and the new pair was the wrong pair. The loss, he was very clear, was not a loss because of anything to do with him. The loss was a loss because of the sawdust and the sneakers. He once threw a tantrum so severe at a tournament in Stockholm that he hit a soda can with his racket, and the can flew through the air and landed inches from a small child. McEnroe later wrote about this incident, and I want you to hear how he wrote about it. He said, "The can hit a child, and then I left the building." He didn't apologize. He didn't agonize. He moved on. The can hit a child, then I left the building. Now Dweck reads this autobiography in the early 2000s, and she sees something almost no tennis fan would have seen. She sees a textbook fixed mindset. McEnroe doesn't just blame the umpire and the sawdust because he's a brat. He blames them because he has to. Because if the loss was about him, if he lost because his opponent was actually playing better that day, or because there was some specific thing in his game he hadn't figured out yet, then who is John McEnroe? He is the man who is the best in the world because he is built different. He doesn't lose to better, he loses to sneakers. And so when the inevitable hard moments come, when somebody on tour starts catching up to him, when his game starts to need to evolve, when he is in his mid-20s and the next generation of players is figuring out his weaknesses, McEnroe cannot do the one thing that would save him. He cannot say, "I have something to learn here." He literally cannot say it. The sentence does not exist inside his mindset. To say "I have something to learn" would be to admit that he had ever not known something, and he is the man who is the best in the world because he was born knowing his career plateaus. He keeps playing for years, but he is never again the player he was in 1984. By his early 30s, he is gone from the top of the sport. He retires, and in his book he writes a sentence that, if you have heard the rest of this, you will hear differently than he meant it. He writes, "I never knew how to make myself better." He didn't know how. The man considered the most naturally talented tennis player of his generation didn't know how to make himself better, because the entire concept of making yourself better requires that you not be finished yet. And inside John McEnroe's mindset, he had been finished from the day he was born. Now picture a different kid in a different bedroom in a different decade. It is 1978. A skinny 15-year-old in Wilmington, North Carolina is staring at a list pinned to the door of his high school gym. The list is the names of the boys who made the varsity basketball team. He is reading the list very slowly because he cannot believe it. His name is not on it. He has been cut from the team. His name is Michael Jordan. He goes home. He goes up to his bedroom. He closes the door and he cries. He is 15 years old, and the thing he wants more than anything in the world has just told him he isn't good enough. His mother told this story decades later. She said her son cried in his room for hours. Now stop the tape there for a second, Because this is the moment in the lives of probably 99% of human beings where the door of a particular dream closes. The kid gets cut. The kid concludes, okay, basketball isn't for me. Maybe I'm not built for this. Maybe I should try something else. And the world loses what could have been a basketball player and gains something else, which is fine. That is how life works. What Michael Jordan did was the opposite. He got off the bed. He went down to the gym. And from that day until the day he became the best basketball player who ever lived, by any measurement, by any era, by any standard the sport has ever used, he practiced every single day with a kind of focus that is genuinely difficult for a normal person to imagine. His high school coach said that Jordan would be the first one in the gym in the morning before school, and he would still be there at night when the janitors were locking up. In college at North Carolina, his teammates said the same thing. Other players would come to practice. Jordan would already be there sweating when they walked in. In the NBA with the Bulls, his coach Phil Jackson said that Jordan, after winning a championship, after being named Finals MVP, after being on the cover of every magazine in the country, Michael Jordan would be in the gym the next morning, working on the parts of his game that he thought were weakest. And here is the part that is the whole point of this story. Jordan was not a man who never failed. Jordan failed constantly. He has a quote. You have probably seen it on a poster somewhere, where he counts up the failures of his career. He says, I have missed more than 9,000 shots. I have lost almost 300 games. 26 times I have been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I have missed 26 times, trusted to take the shot to win the game for his team. And he missed. The most famous basketball player who ever lived, missing the shot that would have won the game 26 separate times in front of millions of people with the season on the line. McEnroe lost a tennis match because of sawdust. Jordan missed 26 game winners and went and asked his coach for the ball next time. Phil Jackson tells a story about this. There is a famous game where Jordan misses a shot at the buzzer that would have won them a critical playoff game. The team is destroyed. They walk back to the locker room. Reporters are everywhere. And Jordan's response to the reporters is not the response of a man whose identity has just been wounded. It is something almost weirdly calm. He says, I'll make it next time. And then in the locker room, he tells Phil Jackson, Coach, the next time we are in that situation, give me the ball again. Give me the ball. You have to feel the difference between those two men in your body to really get it. McEnroe and Jordan are not different in their level of talent. McEnroe might actually have been the more naturally gifted athlete. They are different in one thing and one thing only. They are operating two different machines, two different stories about what their abilities mean. McEnroe believes his ability is a fixed thing he was born with. Every loss is therefore a threat to his identity, because every loss is evidence that the thing he was born with might not be as much as he thought. The only safe move in that mindset is to make sure no loss is ever about him. So he blames the sneakers, he blames the sawdust, he blames the kid in the pink shirt. He cannot improve because to improve would require admitting he is not already finished. Jordan believes his ability is something he is building every day for his entire career. Every loss is therefore information. Every missed shot is a piece of data about what to work on tomorrow. Failure does not threaten his identity because his identity is not the shot. His identity is the work, and the work just keeps going. Now here is what I want you to sit with for a second. Look at the parts of your life where you are McEnroe. The parts where one piece of feedback ruins your week. The parts where you can't take a class because what if you're not good at it? The parts where you don't apply for the thing because what if they say no? And what would that mean about you? The parts where every hard moment feels like a verdict. And then look at the parts of your life, and you have them, everybody has them, where you are Jordan. The parts where you fail, and you laugh, and you go again, where the missed shot doesn't even register, because of course you missed. You'll just take the shot again next time. The parts where you are inside the work and not above it. Same person, same brain, two different machines. And the boy in the puzzle room, the one who rubbed his hands together, he was running the second machine. In a part of his life where most 10-year-olds are running the first one, somebody, somewhere, had given him the second machine. We're getting closer to who. I want to slow down for a second, because there is a thing about fixed mindset that gets missed almost every time somebody summarizes this book. And if you miss it, the whole thing turns into a kind of self-help slogan that doesn't help anyone. When you hear about somebody like John McEnroe, when you hear about a man blaming the sawdust on the court for losing a Grand Slam, your first instinct is to think, what a baby, what an ego, what a brat. And then you go through your day a little smug, because obviously you would never be that ridiculous. You would never blame your problems on a guy in a pink shirt. You're not John McEnroe. But that reaction misses the whole thing. McEnroe wasn't being a brat. He was being something much more human and much more sad. He was protecting himself from a piece of information that he literally could not survive. Inside a fixed mindset, your abilities are not just things you do. They are who you are. They are the answer to the question, what makes me valuable? What makes me lovable? What makes me me? And so when one of those abilities fails, when the shot doesn't go in, when the deal falls apart, when the kid says, I don't want to talk to you right now, what is being threatened is not just your performance. What is being threatened is your existence as a worthwhile person. Think about that for a second. Because if your existence as a worthwhile person depends on you being good at the thing, if every failure is a referendum on your soul, then of course you can't take in the information. The information is too dangerous. You will twist anything. You will blame anyone. You will lie to a stranger about a 5th grade math test, because the alternative is annihilation. This is why the fixed mindset is so much more painful than the growth mindset, even though from the outside it looks like the more confident way to live. From the inside, it is exhausting. Every challenge is a war. Every conversation is a test. Every relationship is something you might be exposed in. You are walking around carrying a thing called your worth, and every interaction in your day is a chance for somebody to chip pieces off it. Dweck did studies on this, the inside experience of the fixed mindset, and the results are heartbreaking. She found that people in fixed mindsets, when they failed, didn't just feel disappointed. They felt humiliated. They reported their failures using words like devastated, ruined, finished. One college student told her, after getting a bad grade on a midterm, that he felt like he had been turned inside out in front of the whole class. A bad grade, on a midterm, in a class he could retake. And here is what is so cruel about it. The same fixed mindset that makes failure feel like death is the mindset that almost guarantees more failure. Because if you cannot afford to look bad, you cannot afford to try anything where looking bad is even a possibility. You cannot ask the question in the meeting. You cannot apply for the job. You cannot say, I don't know. You cannot ask for help. And so the very thing that would let you grow, being okay with looking like a beginner, is the thing that the fixed mindset has put completely out of reach. So you are stuck. And the stuckness gets worse every year, because every year you avoid the thing gets bigger and scarier, and your identity gets more brittle. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something before we keep going. The people in this book who are stuck inside fixed mindsets are not bad people. They are not weak people. McEnroe was not a weak person. He was, in his own way, doing the only thing his mindset would let him do. He was protecting an identity he didn't know how to live without. And if there are areas of your life where you have been doing the same thing, where you have been blaming the sawdust for years, I want you to understand that you are not lazy. You are not a coward. You are doing what a person inside that operating system has to do. The question is not whether you are weak. The question is whether somebody can show you that the operating system itself is changeable. Now, what is interesting, and what Dweck found, and what is going to take us into the next part of this story, is that you can take this exact dynamic and scale it up. You can take the McEnroe pattern out of the body of one tennis player and you can install it in the walls of a building. You can install it in the culture of a company. You can install it in 100,000 employees at once. And when you do, you get one of the most spectacular collapses in the history of American business. Picture this. It is the year 2000. You are walking into the lobby of a glass tower in downtown Houston, Texas. The building belongs to a company called Enron. At this point in history, Enron is the most admired corporation in America. Fortune magazine has named it the most innovative company in the country 6 years in a row. Its stock price is in the stratosphere. Its CEO is on magazine covers. Inside the building, the energy is electric. Everybody who works there believes they are working at the future of capitalism. There is a particular phrase that the press uses to describe the people inside Enron. They call them the smartest guys in the room. The phrase shows up in profile after profile. It is meant as the highest possible compliment. Enron has, the journalists keep saying, hired the most intelligent human beings the American economy can produce. Stanford MBAs, Harvard physicists, Wall Street prodigies. The hiring team has one filter, and the filter is, are you a star? Inside the company, this filter has a name. They call it the talent mindset. The CEO, a man named Jeff Skilling, believes that what separates great companies from average companies is one thing: whether they have hired the smartest people. So Enron hires only the smartest people. They pay them more than anybody. They promote them faster than anybody. They throw out the bottom 10% of performers every year, no matter what, no matter who. Because in the talent mindset, you are either a star or you are deadweight, and deadweight has to go. Now stop and think about what kind of person that culture creates. You walk in the door at 26 years old with your Harvard MBA, and on day one you are told, you are here because you are brilliant. The other people in this room are brilliant. We hired you because you are exceptional, and we are going to fire you the second you stop being exceptional. Welcome to Enron. What does that do to a person? What it does, and this is what Dweck saw when she went back through the wreckage years later, is it makes everybody inside the building unable to admit a single mistake, ever, about anything. Because the moment you admit a mistake, you have admitted you are not a star. And the moment you have admitted you are not a star, the bottom 10% comes for you. So you do the thing McEnroe did. You blame the sawdust. You blame the market. You blame the regulators. You blame the press. You blame anybody, anything but yourself. Because yourself is the one thing in your life you cannot afford to question. And so what starts happening inside Enron, slowly at first and then all at once, is that the company stops being able to see itself. A trader makes a bad bet. He cannot say it was a bad bet, so he hides it inside an accounting structure, and the structure gets called a special purpose entity, and the entity gets given a clever name, and the loss becomes invisible. A division loses $1 billion. The division cannot say it lost $1 billion, so the $1 billion gets moved into another division and renamed. A whole business line is failing. The business line cannot fail because the people running it are stars, and stars do not fail. So the failure gets dressed up in language and presented to the board as success. By the year 2000, the entire company has become a structure that cannot tell the truth about itself. Not because the people inside it are evil. Most of them weren't. Most of them were ordinary smart people who had been put inside an operating system where admitting you were wrong was professional suicide. And so they did the only thing the system would let them do. They lied to the auditors, to the shareholders, to Wall Street, to each other, to themselves. In December of 2001, the lies caught up. Enron declared bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. 20,000 employees lost their jobs in a matter of weeks. Most of them lost their entire retirement savings because they had been encouraged to invest in Enron stock that turned out to be worth nothing. $65 billion of value evaporated. The CEO went to prison. The company's auditor, Arthur Andersen, one of the largest accounting firms in the world, collapsed alongside it. And here is the part that I think is the whole point. The smartest guys in the room weren't actually that smart. Not in any way that mattered. They had the credentials and the test scores and the SAT prep. What they did not have was the one thing that would have saved them, which is the ability to look at a bad number and say, "That was wrong. What should we learn from it?" They could not say that sentence. The sentence had been outlawed by the culture, so the bad numbers kept getting hidden, and the hidden numbers got bigger, until the bigger numbers got so large that no amount of clever accounting could absorb them, and the whole $65 billion building came down. Now here is what is genuinely terrifying about this story. Enron was not unusual. Enron was the most extreme version of a pattern Dweck found everywhere. She studied companies all over the country, and she found that the ones who were obsessed with hiring stars, the ones who had this whole talent mindset baked into their hiring and their promotions and their internal language, were the ones who consistently underperformed the companies that didn't. Compare Enron to a different company in the same era. Dweck and other researchers looked at companies like General Electric under Jack Welch, and Wells Fargo and Procter & Gamble, and what they found inside those companies was a totally different operating system. Inside those companies, you were allowed to fail. Inside those companies, you were expected to fail. The CEOs talked openly about their own mistakes. The cultures had specific phrases. At IBM, under Lou Gerstner, the phrase was that you should run toward problems, not away from them. At Wells Fargo, executives gave each other awards for the worst decision of the year, so they could analyze it. At GE, Jack Welch fired plenty of people, but he also famously gave a senior executive named Jeff Immelt a massive promotion right after Immelt had blown a project in the plastics division, because Immelt could explain exactly what he had learned from blowing it. These companies didn't have a culture of stars. They had a culture of growers, people who were allowed to start at 26 not knowing things, and were judged on whether they got better. People who could say I was wrong about that and not lose their job. People who inside their own heads were not walking around defending an identity. They were walking around inside the work, and the work kept going. Same industry, same talent pool, same general economic conditions, but two completely different sets of beliefs about what people are. One belief grew companies that are still running today. The other belief made the largest bankruptcy in American history. And the thing I want you to feel, really sit with, is that none of this had anything to do with how smart anybody was. The people at Enron were genuinely brilliant. The people at GE and Wells Fargo and IBM were not, on average, smarter. The difference was not measurable in IQ. It was not measurable on a test. The difference was a sentence. One sentence about what your abilities mean. If your abilities are who you are, you will hide your mistakes until they bury you. If your abilities are what you are growing, you will name your mistakes, and they will teach you. That is the entire difference between the boy who rubbed his hands together at the puzzle and the company that hid $65 billion of losses inside a special purpose entity. Same mechanism, different scale. One sentence about what abilities are. So we have seen what the fixed mindset costs. We have seen it in a fifth grader lying about a math test after 20 minutes inside a particular sentence. We have seen it in the most talented tennis player of his generation losing a grand slam to a man in a pink shirt. We have seen it in a building full of geniuses in Houston, Texas, hiding $65 billion of losses because none of them could survive being wrong about anything. What we have not seen, what we still have not answered, is the question we started with. The question Carol Dweck sat with after watching that 10-year-old boy rub his hands together at a puzzle he couldn't solve. Where does growth mindset come from? Can you give it to somebody who doesn't have it? Because if the answer is no, if growth mindset is just a thing you either got handed in childhood or you didn't, then this is a kind of tragic video. You watch it, you nod, you recognize the patterns in your own life, and then you go back to whatever you were doing because you're 43 years old and the operating system was installed a long time ago. But the answer is not no. The answer Dweck found, after 30 years of staring at this question from every angle she could find, is that you can absolutely install growth mindset in a person who doesn't have it. You can install it in a child, you can install it in a teenager, you can install it in yourself. And the most surprising part of her research is that the way you do it is so absurdly simple, so almost embarrassingly small, that when you hear it for the first time, you do not believe it could possibly work. So I want to take you to one more place, the last place we're going in this video, and I want you to watch what happens, because what happens is the proof that the boy in the puzzle room is not a miracle. He is a recipe. Picture this. It is a high school in a poor neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. The students at this school are mostly Black and Latino. Most of them come from families where money is tight. Most of them have been told in 100 small ways since they were old enough to listen that school is not really their world. They have been told it by underfunded classrooms and stressed teachers and standardized tests that come back covered in red ink. They have been told it for so long that most of them, by the time they get to high school, have already quit. Not officially, they still show up, but internally the door has closed. A teacher at this school decides to do something. The teacher's name is not the famous part of the story. The famous part is the change she makes, and the change is one word, across the entire school, in every classroom. When a student doesn't pass an assignment, the assignment doesn't come back with an F. It comes back with 2 words, not yet. That is the change. That is the entire change. There is no new curriculum. There is no extra funding. There is no Silicon Valley app. There is one word, yet, added to the bottom of every failed test in the building. And what happens to the kids in that school over the course of one academic year is something I want you to feel before you analyze. A student takes a math test. She doesn't pass. She gets the test back, and where the F used to be, the paper says, not yet. She stares at it because nobody has ever said that to her about school. School has only ever spoken to her in verdicts. You passed, you failed, you did, you didn't. School has been a series of doors closing in her face since she was 6 years old. And now somebody is saying, you haven't passed this yet. What that one word does to her is something Dweck and her colleagues went into that school to measure because they couldn't quite believe what the teachers were reporting. The kids were starting to behave differently. They were turning in assignments they would have skipped before. They were asking for help. They were trying problems they had previously refused to try. The school's test scores were climbing, not by a tiny amount, by the kind of amount that in education research doesn't normally happen. So what was happening? What was happening is that the word yet was doing something to the kids' relationship with failure. It was changing what failure meant. Before yet, failure was a verdict. You took the test. You didn't pass. That was the answer. You were the kind of person who didn't pass that test. And next week, when a similar test came around, you would be the kind of person who didn't pass that one either, because that is who you are. After yet, failure stopped being a verdict and became a location. You are here. You haven't passed this yet. The road ahead has more time on it. You are not finished. There are tomorrows still to come, and the version of you in those tomorrows is not the same as the version of you today. Imagine being 15 years old and having that frame handed to you by an institution. Imagine being 15 years old and having every closed door in your life suddenly say, you haven't opened me yet, because you might. Some of those kids, actual real students at that actual school in Chicago, went from being kids who would not have graduated high school to being kids who got into college, not because the curriculum changed, not because they were given any new resources, because somebody put a word at the end of their failed tests that gave their failures a future tense. Dweck went into other schools and tested versions of this. She found the same thing every time. When you teach kids that intelligence is something they grow, not something they have, their grades go up, their attendance goes up, their willingness to try hard problems goes up. The effect is most dramatic in students who had been performing the worst, the ones who had most thoroughly believed they weren't smart kids. Those kids changed the most, because those kids were the ones whose closed doors had the most yet to give back to them. So now think about this. If a single word added to a failed test can do that to a 15-year-old whose entire educational life has been telling her she is not a school kind of person, what could the right sentences do to you? You are not 15. You have a few more layers of installed beliefs than those kids did. Some of the doors in your life have been closed for 30 or 40 years. The voice in your head that says, I am not a math person, I am not a creative person, I am not a person who gets healthy, I am not a person who can leave this job, I am not a person who could love again. That voice has been there a long time. It feels like the truth. It feels like just a description of reality. But it isn't a description, it is a sentence. A sentence somebody installed in you on a particular day when you were small. And the entire body of research we have just walked through is the proof that sentences in human heads can be replaced, which brings us, finally, back to him, the boy in the puzzle room. Carol Dweck spent 30 years trying to figure out what was different about that 10-year-old. She wrote dissertations and ran experiments and traveled around the country watching children fail at puzzles in classrooms in Texas and Illinois and California. She studied tennis players and CEOs and fifth graders and grandparents. She wrote a book called Mindset that became one of the most quoted psychology books of the last 20 years. And by the end, she had the answer. He was not born like that. The boy who rubbed his hands together at a hard puzzle did not arrive on Earth wired for resilience. He was not the lucky one in some genetic lottery. He was, in every measurable way, an ordinary 10-year-old kid in 1978. The only thing that was unusual about him was the language he had been given somewhere. Dweck eventually traced it back to his parents and a few key teachers. Somebody had been saying sentences to him for years that the kid 2 desks over had never heard. When he tried something hard and failed, somebody had said, "That's interesting. What could you try next time?" When he got something right, somebody had said, "Wow, you really worked hard on that." When he was stuck on a problem, somebody had said, "You don't get this yet, but you will if you keep going." Hundreds of small sentences said over thousands of small moments, until by the time he was 10 years old, his internal voice, the voice that talks to him in his head when he hits a wall, was a voice made of those sentences. A voice that said failure is interesting. A voice that said hard means I'm growing. A voice that said you don't have it yet, and yet is a real word. He was not a miracle. He was a recipe. He had been cooked by language. And the entire body of Dweck's work, all 30 years of it, is the proof that the recipe is reproducible. You can do for yourself today at 38 or 52 or 71 what was done for him. You can change the sentences you say to yourself when you hit a wall. You can change the sentences you say to your kid when she comes home with a test she didn't pass. You can change the sentences your team hears from you when one of them admits they messed up. You can install yet at the end of every closed door you have walked past for the last 20 years. That is the whole book, not a personality test, not a chart, not a category you fall into, a sentence you can change, a way of speaking to yourself that, after enough repetition, becomes a way of being. The boy in the puzzle room was you. He was always you. You just got a different recipe. Before you click off this video, I want to give you one thing to carry. Not a takeaway, not a list. One thing. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a door you have stopped trying to open. You know which one. It came up a few times while you were listening. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a body you stopped trying to take care of. Maybe it's a creative thing you did when you were 20 and quietly decided wasn't yours after all. There is a sentence you have been saying about that door for years, and the sentence is some version of, I am not the kind of person who. I want you, before you go to bed tonight, to add one word to the end of that sentence. Yet, and then sit with what that one word does to your chest. Notice whether something in you wants to argue with it. Notice whether something in you suddenly wants to cry. Notice whether some small part of you that has been quiet for a long time wakes up and says, "Wait, is that allowed?" It's allowed. It's been allowed the whole time. Nobody told you, but the door was never closed. It was just unopened. Yet, if you want to actually read Dweck's book, and I think you should, because there is so much more in there than I could fit into one video, including a whole section on how to talk to a child without breaking them with the wrong kind of praise. I'll put the Amazon and Audible links right under this video. The audiobook is read warmly, and it's a comfortable listen on a walk. If this is the kind of video you want more of, subscribe to the channel. We do this with a different book every week. One book, one sitting, one chance to put a different sentence in your head than the one you walked in with. And the next time you hit a wall, the next time something in your life gives you back what feels like a verdict, I want you to remember a 10-year-old boy in a small classroom at Columbia University in 1978, picking up a puzzle that was too hard for him, rubbing his hands together, and saying to no one in particular, "I love a challenge. Thanks for being here."